Hello, my name is Wilberto Torres, host of Today in Packaging podcast. My guest for this episode is Robert Champion, president of InnoFlex Solutions, and we are going to be talking about Factory Acceptance Test Part 1. On this episode, we cover cost, people, impact, and ahead of competition. I hope that you learn and enjoy on this podcast. Hello, Robert. Welcome to Today in Packaging podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Wilberto. Good to see you and good to be here with you in this podcast.
It's a pleasure for me, sir, to have you with me here talking about a great topic today. But before I start, I want that you give me and to the people that will be looking and listening this podcast a little introduction about yourself.
Yeah, so pretty short intro. I won't go too long. I'm the president of InnoFlex Solutions, which is a packaging, consulting, and an engineering services company. And basically, we're in a food and beverage space to help OEMs and CPGs execute their plans, do it quickly, do it for profit. Our value proposition is to find opportunities to help our customers win that are unique for them. So essentially, we love what we do, and we're a team standing behind what we say we're going to do, and we've been doing it for a few years. So that's the snapshot of us, Wilberto.
Excellent, Robert. I appreciate that. Today, we are going to be talking about four topics related to the factory acceptance test. Okay. This is the video one of two, where we are going to be talking about factory acceptance test, the impact to the operation. But today we have four main topics, which is cost, people, impact, and ahead of competition. Okay. So Robert, we are going to start with the first one, which is cost. What I want to talk with you as an organic conversation is what is the impact in terms of cost related to factory acceptance test? From your mind, something based on your experience also, what is that main factor related to cost?
Well, that's a big question. So we're going to condense it down because we've got 30 minutes, I believe, for this first one. But I'm going to talk about just the building blocks of an FAT. So let's talk about the people costs, the logistics of importing people, deploying people. Let's just talk about the United States. If you're in North America, yes. Typically you've got a team of diverse people, different roles within an organization. You've got external equipment suppliers that are deployed. So just talk about the hiring company. They probably have 6 people that they'll send on an FAT. And we're talking about the pre-pandemic scenario. All right. So it's typically, and, if you did all the costs on their hourly labor rate, their travel costs, and the time, you're about, $20,000 US per FAT. All right. So that's people time, all the expenses. That's pennies in the big scheme of it. Really, the opportunity is the success of the FAT. And our challenge that we have, I'm going to set the table is, this is part of our going deeper in our episode here, is the success criteria and the percentage of successful FATs is really the challenge. So I took a look just generally at some census data this morning. That's public information, the U.S. Census data. And the United States in just investments on capital equipment in 2020 was over $1 trillion across all industries in capital equipment. And the big thing here was errors and omissions in that investment totaled $8 billion US dollars. So you spend $1 trillion, $8 billion, you just throw it away. There's no return on it. And that could be errors and omissions in change orders and things changing on the scope of that equipment as from the original purchase order to delays, failed FATs, not successful, and all the cost that goes to baking that whole thing up. And this is, that's new equipment. And then existing operations, which we have more existing factories and plants. I don't know what the capital expenditure was for that, but there was 5.4% of that expenditure in loss revenue or just lost return, no return on the investment. And so all that just simply means that there was a lot of noise, a lot of late startups, a lot of bad investments, and more importantly, the cost in operations didn't meet its goals, meaning people in production facilities are not achieving their goals.
Yes. Something that I want to add, Robert, is that below the main point of cost of factory acceptance test
Sure.
is that in addition to the travel and the amount of people that will go, right, is the timeline is one of them that I want to touch base with you quick, and requirements. So sometimes the timeline on when you need to have your equipment to be successful in your operation, you know, and keep ahead in the process of the market, that will define the cost that you will do to the FIT, but it's also the requirement. What exactly you will be looking during the factory acceptance test? You know, can you prioritize what you are looking so you can reduce the amount of time a day that you will be doing the factory acceptance test? This is something really important also that will go below that main point.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's about being prepared. So I have a couple of points I wrote down: is preparedness and understanding your planning and your risk mitigation. Those are the top three. So what are you looking for? How are you going to measure it? And if it happens, how are you going to mitigate it? So that's, you know, and I think even before an FAT, we're now getting into what we call a pre-FAT. And, you know, that's part of this. So you start with a pre-FAT, everybody's ready on board. Did you do what you say you're going to do? Did you validate it? Now you deploy the people. The real challenge is not conducting a pre-FAT, either, you know, the hiring company and the supplier. All right. And they're not really collaborating on that. So, yeah, the timeline can be reduced, especially going post pandemic, if we were to do those three things and say, yeah, we all agree, we did them. There's documentation for it. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So below cost, the travel requirement timeline. And the last one that I want to mention is post pandemic, because you mentioned this several times already. Is the virtual FIT. We are going to have another podcast to just talk about virtual FIT because this is really important, Robert.
It is.
But some people think that the cost doing virtual FIT will be less than travel there, but for me, it's not true. And this is something that we are going to talk about later, right? But you can mention something about that now, so you know, to put that appetizer.
Well, it's a misnomer. It's a misnomer because we have to look at the total cost of doing business, right? In this, the FAT is one piece. Yeah. So you're right. Virtual FAT. If you don't send people, that's just expenses. But your ongoing cost is, what does it cost you in operations if that said equipment or line does not perform as you've purchased it to do? So either way, it goes back to preparedness. What do you want? What are you validating? And then, you know, ramping it up into operations. Yeah, virtual.
Exactly.
It's going to be the same result. It's about, and those are things that we get into in our next FAT. It's really the missing ingredients inside an FAT, which is really much more than just documentation and having great checklists and having either digital checklists or the old-fashioned way, board and clip with a pen and a time watch, a stopwatch. It's more than that. It's the things that most companies miss that are really, I'm going to call them the building blocks for an FAT.
Yeah, and definitely, like I mentioned, we promised that we are going to have a podcast just for virtual FIT. And this topic is driving me to the next main topic of factory acceptance test on this video, which is people. Robert, people, you know, and let's start below people with the skill levels. What type of skill levels do you think that the people will go to the FIT should have?
Yeah. So again, remember we talked earlier about the old paradigm or the framework was the primary company having different functions and people from those functions being in the FAT. Yeah. So they were looking at certain things that they would look for. they would do their checklist, the other person do their checklist. That's great. Everyone's prepared. Everyone's doing their job. But what's always missed in FATs are variability. I'm going to use the word variabilities. And the variabilities exist in 4 areas. And you'll hear Interflex Solutions. Well, in Packbrain, we're talking about this together now. And this is what happens in packaging systems. It's the product variability, meaning, do we have the standards and all of the ingredients about this product that we can baseline? So we need baseline on the product. We need baseline on the input materials. We need the skill level of the operators that are going to be there in the FAT. What do they know and what do they don't know? We need, again, the methodology of the line. So the sequence of operation, how is it planning to run that line or that piece of equipment? And then I'm going to use the last one, I'm going to call modes of operation. That's the engagement on how that asset really runs or is utilized in the company's facility. Meaning, do they stop the line to do a regulatory compliance check that they didn't tell the original equipment manufacturer to be aware of it in the line design? So things of these nature, I'm going to call them, they're the 4 inputs that have variability that is not always documented. And when you go to an FAT, it's a snapshot, only a certain point of time, and may not have all those variabilities in place. So you need to have all the variabilities somewhere in the FAT to try and validate the tolerance of this variability. So when in production, you are prepared and it's not a surprise stopping the production line because of micro and minor stoppages, which again will impact the ability to grow that business.
Yes. So most of the company, they don't have too much personnel, to go to the FITs.
Exactly.
And they start to debate, within the company, if we send our people or we hire external firm to go there. For me, I'm a believer that employees should go to the FIT, not external companies, because they are the one that own the process. They are the one that know exactly what really they need. But what are your thoughts about that? You have with experience as a manager in big industry, how you see hiring other companies to do the factory acceptance test for you?
Roberto, you really, your question is very pointed and it's apropos for today. It doesn't matter internal or external. The problem is the same. I'm going to say that because I agree your internal people are going to be owners of that end result of the FAT. They're going to live with it, right? The external companies, I'm not going to say this, this is going to be like a conundrum. They'll be partners. They'll help you through the FAT, but they don't live with it day to day. That's where the opportunity is. What's missing is both parties collaborating on the variability in those 4 building blocks. I'm going to keep saying that. Exactly. And I'm going to say, being a prior CPG employee and leading in those industries, sometimes we didn't know what we thought we knew because of the amount of volume we would do on a certain SKU. We just ran that. When we ran a new volume or new SKU, it introduces different variabilities. So what's missing is not the processes and the flow charts and the checklists and the your beginning of a production run meeting and after production run meeting. It's while it's running issue, and that typically what happens is stoppages, line stoppages, breakdowns. Morale of employees being low because they've done their best, they were trained, but someone didn't tell them that, this machine really only runs at 200 a minute, it can't run at 210, and running it at 210 will induce some variability like minor stops and breakdowns. So, yes, and those are some of the things that are not caught early. And that's why that FAT, the mitigation is so important. So to answer your question, I would say your internal people they will be owners, but I have seen that both internal and external miss some of the basic building blocks of an FAT, and then going into an SAT operation maintaining
No,
that.
of course. And for me, it makes sense that the external people will miss stuff in the FIT because they are not part of the process. But that is where you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast the key word here, pre-FIT. So if you company, we hire company like us, Packbrain and you
Yeah.
know, to do FIT. Yes, of course, we can do the process. We can do that implementation, but the pre-FIT will be one of our requirements,
Yes.
right? To be
Yeah.
able to be successful, because without pre-FIT, I will not be able to understand your process. And if I don't understand your process, how I can deliver to you a successful product during the FIT?
Yeah. So the pre-FAT, I'm a big proponent of a pre-FAT because it forces the OEM to do due diligence
Yes.
before calling in the hiring company, the food company, whatever, to come in and to validate with them the machine performance or line performance. So Wilberto, I believe in teaching companies how to do pre-FATs, both OEMs and say CPGs or in pharma. I think our value is teaching how to do. You said let them build and own, but we could do it for them. But long term, that's not sustainable, right? Because there's only so much capacity we both have to do those FATs for them. But if we can coach them and they take it internally and that becomes part of their standard routines and how they do it, you empower them to be better and to grow and to be faster and more nimbler. And that's what they want to do. They want to be faster and nimbler. Yeah.
Yeah, that is great information, Robert, that you mentioned there. One more below people, because I want to get your perspective on this. So
Okay.
we talk about people skills, right? Related internal or external,
Right.
the impact to the operation that could cause, right? That no matter internal or external, we can have issues during FIT. You are not well prepared. We understand
Exactly.
that already. But what about post factory acceptance test communication? How important is that from the people that we go to the factory acceptance test, or could be internal or external, back to the business, so they can share the correct information on what is coming and what was the successful part, or
Yeah.
was not too successful.
Yeah. So a post FAT is an SAT, site acceptance test, which is scaled up, right?
Yes, but you're right. But let's focus on the communication, not
Yeah.
implementation. So, for example, let's put this more clear. I go to the FIT, right? And then I need to go to you, my manager, and say, hey, this was the result. How should be that communication? It's just
Oh,
verbal, or you should have something really well documented. So when you receive the equipment, you already have a plan ahead of time.
yeah. So in most situations, there are procedures, whether it's electronic, should be electronic documentation. So it can be live and real. That's captured. That typically what happens is those that are responsible for approving the FAT success sign off on it, right? On all the different requirements for the OEM and for the hiring company. And what happens with that is you carry that into, say, your factory. And what I mean is getting ready. So what do you do with that documentation, right? So there are going to be some issues potentially, maybe small. And we talked about mitigations. So you take those issues into the factory and you start working on it ahead of time. You start mitigating, wow, potentially we said this line's going to do, we thought we said 210. Somehow in engineering, they've got 200 and they told the OEM 200. We really need 210 from the factory. So that's going to induce probably some issues downstream or upstream on our production line. So now everyone can get ready and start, typically you have some buffer time. Typically, maybe not a lot. If your FAT is successful, you have the buffer time. If it's not successful, you've eaten up the buffer time getting that FAT ready in cost. So yeah, typically electronic documentation and having that communication with the stakeholders within the factory and manufacturing. So
Perfect.
You must be transparent, you must be visible. And I'm going to go back again into real operations. The success requirement there is exponentially at a higher risk because you've got more moving parts. And different people that were at the FAT are now going to be running that production line. Different shifts, different training skill levels, different sort of expectations, and all that just needs to be captured. That goes back to the prefat, understanding the organizational culture, the OEM's capability, and then again, what are the gaps and the mitigation plan to bring that over?
Yeah. In the pharmaceutical industry and medical device or regulated business, before FIT, companies send a document, a binder with documentation of requirement to the OEM, and they need to be approved by quality, and it's a lot of procedure that they need to follow. But food and beverage and CPG is not so regulated in this aspect in terms of FIT documentation. But anyway, I recommend to at least have a small scale electric documentation like Robert mentioned, because you can have control of exactly what you are doing during FIT, and you can document exactly what happened. And you don't have surprises when the equipment is delivered and you start to run your SIT, because sometimes people go to the FIT and the machine will take maybe 2 months to be delivered, and maybe the person that went to the FIT resign or go to a different role, and then, okay, what happened? Hey, what happened? Can I have a conference with you you can explain to me? If you have everything well documented, you will have everything clear, no matter who is the person that is working on the project,
Yeah, exactly.
it's really important. So related to SIT, more to come, because we are going to have part 2 of this video where we are going to be talking about SIT. Perfect. So we already covered costs and people, Robert. So the third main point for today's video is impact. Impact on operation.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
So something that you mentioned to me during the preparation of this podcast is true opportunity cost. Give me a little bit more about TCO.
Yeah, so that's really the why we do the FATs. So the FAT is just an enabler for your operations, because at the end of the day, and it's more of an enabler to allow you to produce goods and services. So we're talking goods, consumable goods or durable goods, for this pharma, food and beverage, right? And so, what we're talking about here is the cost that you plan versus your real cost that is a variance. And your plan costs is how you run your business, how you schedule your operations, your margins for profit and revenue. Oftentimes what happens, and most technical people, which, I'm one, also a business owner and strategist, is we don't see beyond the technical in looking at the overall business operation. So maintenance costs. So what happens is if it didn't run well, or it had issues with the line or equipment had issues in the FAT, we documented it. We said, whatever, I won't make up a story, but there's some variability in one of the 4 areas, right? And we didn't have a mitigation plan, or we just needed to be in production. Let me give you the real life scenario. The line was late, the equipment was late out of an FAT, because 50%, and probably want to get into this, at least 50% of FATs are unsuccessful at the first try. And I could pull data from the census data, but from my experience, being in the industry for 30 years, working for multinational corporations and OEMs, 50% of the times you fail an FAT or it was not ready. And what that meant was several things. So what happens is if you get it into operations and we didn't resolve the challenge, or we said, okay, we can fix it in operations, and we're pressed up against the clock because we've got a timeline to hit our consumer and our customer store shelf with product. So that's driving us. So they're going to do a store shelf reset on every certain part of the year. They do a reset. We need our product on the shelf. We need it there strategically. And if we just move it, get it there, and we run the line, and we make the product launch, what happens is your operations is stuck with unfavorable variable costs. And long term, you won't be able to produce more volume on that line because it's suffering to produce at the percentage you asked it to do.
Yes.
So instead of producing at 95%, it's producing at 60% efficiency. So it's basically capacity you can't utilize to operate your business. So we talked about, again, the opportunity cost, TCO, and maintenance. Having equipment that doesn't perform, that has a lot of maintenance intervention with people costs in your inventory, having to have parts on consignment or in your own stores for tax implications. You got money sitting on your shelf, you don't need to have it sitting here. So in an FAT, companies like yours and mine, we help organizations look at these things before they make the purchase, so they are not living with this decapacitated operation and margins that are not favorable for them. The other thing I'm going to say is morale. And what happens typically, and we're going to go back to people, when you have a production line that doesn't produce very well, the morale goes down. Because remember, that team was engaged, they were invigorated, they were energized for this new piece of equipment that had the best technology for them. There are all the bells and whistles, but in reality, it hadn't produced to the level that they expected. And over time, that morale starts to go down, and your performance follows that down and down. And then we try to implement all these different procedures and tactics to get it to run better, that asset or line. But what's missing is, did we adequately in the pre-FAT and the FAT uncover the variability that could happen and enable solutions? And if we didn't do it because we had to hit the short store shelves with product, can we now come back and do that in production mode? And typically what happens is most companies can't do it because they're busy making product. So hence companies like yours and mine can come in and help stop the bleeding and help them understand how to fix the problem and enable them to produce and bring down their TCO. So I gave you a lot here in this little segue. But this is the real important part here. Yes. It's not because the FAT is $50,000 if it's a European FAT or 20 or American. That's irrelevant. What's the real challenge is it impacting your ability to sell your product? And is your morale going down? And are you able to thrive? And that's why we want to do a great FAT in a pre-FAT.
Exactly. That for me is the impact is not just related to cost. Impact is more related to the operational standpoint, like you mentioned, and we back to the people skill, and obviously the pre-FAT. So for me, impact will be driven directly by the people skills and your pre-FAT, and not necessarily by the cost. Okay, because like you mentioned, could be something here cost X, and then the other one is cost Y, but you don't know the impact on operational standpoint if you don't have a good implementation process, which we are going to be talking about on part 2 of this FIT. But below impact, and before I go to the last main point, is what about branding? When you have a factory acceptance test, it's because you decide to buy a new equipment. And when you decide to buy a new equipment, could be to improve your operational process or introduce a new product, a new packaging, So what is the impact on branding having a good factory acceptance test?
This is competition. It's all about, America's built on competition, being leaders of the free world, being examples, employing people, empowering homes, people to live the American dream. Yeah, that's all great. The impact is we need to always be first on shelf. That's why America is great, is because we're always striving to push the envelope, right? To just be a little bit more creative and courageous. Well, in doing that, you have to have the time to be able to do that. Meaning, so in production, if the time is not available because we have this lagging production line that doesn't produce at the FAT requirement, it's not allowing the business brand, marketing and sales to innovate and renovate on a timely schedule. And it can hamper, and it goes back to the census data I was talking about earlier. It's not directly correlated. That was about investments, but you can translate that into operations to say that it's also a derivative or an input to your operations that you can't produce the volume you have planned. And furthermore, Wilberto, what I've seen is there's that feedback loop that we need to have in our operations to the external OEMs so that they understand that asset has some challenges and how can we both work together to fix it. And what's missing is the collaboration. You talked about that earlier. You talked about collaboration of now is installed, how you translate that back into the production facility, whether it's pharma or food and beverage. I think the missing component is also OEMs. So if we want to be better as a food producer or a commodity producer, we need our OEMs to be better. So we need to collaborate with them. They need to be proactive on what's going on and why. So there's a feedback loop missing that we can't innovate fast enough, and brands are they're really trying to squeeze the launch schedule from a capital investment, say 18 months in the old paradigm in food and beverage, to 12 months or less. How are we going to do that if we're already today, we're still at $8 billion of wasted money on capital expenditures? How are we going to minimize that if we're going to move faster?
Yeah.
So brands are looking to be creative. We all want the stuff that our marketing and sales teams produce, whether it's new packaging, sustainable materials that are a byproduct of it, plant-based foods, or healthier choices to meet the governmental requirements, or just being good citizens of society and on the earth. How are we going to do that if we can't get our production systems to be more efficient? So
yeah, exactly. So for me, in a simple way to mention all the great information that you just say now is factory acceptance test will help you to improve your quality of your brand or your product, and will help you to have a better distribution process so you can increase the sale. Because if you have a better OEE, you will have more product out of the door, right?
exactly.
So if we go to talking about this topic, then I will move to the last main topic of this video, which is ahead of competition. So Robert, good FIT will increase distribution, OE, sorry, and then great distribution, increase sale. You will improve your quality attribute or your product or your package,
Definitely.
right?
Definitely.
What is the impact below ahead of competition if you have delays on the factory acceptance test and you are not able to meet your goal?
So we had a real life scenario just now, and I hate to use this as a negative, but it's a positive. It forced us to change. Was the pandemic. And how many times did we go to the store when we were not afraid to buy staple items in our home and found them not on shelf? It wasn't just because people were afraid to go to work because they had the virus or potentially to catch it because we didn't know enough to have enough information. Before the pandemic, we were living with operations that weren't performing well. Therefore, someone else, I can give you an example. I went to the store to buy, I can't remember, flour one time. I knew. I couldn't find the brand I wanted. And the only brand was this off brand that I never bought before, but I needed flour. So I bought the off brand. Now, I don't know if I would ever go back to the other brand because it was like, that in my mind, from a consumer, that image of that brand logo is what I remember when I needed it. So, and it probably was just as good as the main brand. So when I go back, I'm going to buy, I have two choices now instead of the one. I'm not committed to just the brand or one famous brand.
It's just the need. It's just the need that you have. Exactly.
So opportunity loss, to answer your question, is opportunity loss if you don't have efficiency to have brands deliver what they want. They're existing brands and then a new innovative brand. So you lock them out of being able to be on shelf.
Yeah, and this is a key aspect because you mentioned that you like this brand, but because you have a need and this brand was not available for you, you have experience with another one that at the end for you maybe worked out.
It gives me options, and you
exactly.
don't want.
And give me an option.
You don't want. If you're competitive, we're talking about competition, right? I play sports. It's about you don't give your competitor an edge, right? So I need my product on shelf, and I need it there on time.
Of course.
All right, and you start backing it up. The pandemic just accelerated the need of us to look at our operations, and it drives us, as you talk about the virtual FATs. To be able, we were forced to do virtual FATs, but I would assume we don't have 2021 data yet or 2020 real data yet. I didn't drill down. I would almost guess that even the virtual FATs, if you're not physically there, the virtual FAT is another way and we need them. but I'm sure it's no better as far as the end result, as far as
it's
in
not better, but we
population.
need it, and we need to adjust our search to that, right? And like I mentioned, we are going to have a podcast just dedicated.
Exactly.
It's really important. But to finish this great podcast about the delay below ahead of competition, you just make a great example of what is the impact in sales for any company if you are not able to continue improving your process, right?
You
But
have to, yeah.
but for me and for you, if you want to avoid delay, you need to have again a clear strategy of documentation. Documentation is key. For me, documentation is key to be successful with the OEM and within your operation, because your OEM will not be able to produce or manufacture a good equipment if they don't have a clear understanding of what you need. Just to having phone call conversation is not enough. The OEM have different people working, changing position, new employees, you know. I have a lot of experience that people went to the FIT and the machine was 1 foot longer than the drawing that they signed at the like 8 months later before.
Yeah.
You know, it's a continued communication, daily meetings, you know, all those kind of stuff is really important. How you see that documentation aspect to avoid delays on FIT?
So I'm going to differ just a little bit from you. I believe in documentation and standards, 100%.
Okay. Tools, yeah, tools.
What's missing is understanding interpretation. Because if you take an FDA requirement, which we all would build by, or an EN standard, or an ISO standard, we all interpret things slightly different. I was an OEM and also in food and beverage. I agree with you. You have to have standards, but it is the ingredients in the standard. Are there the right components in the standards? And what I've seen again in my career has been in these 4 areas, there's one or multiple things missing. And again, in the product requirements, which is the product, the material, people ability. And let me talk about the people again. So every operation or manufacturer, probably a food producer, I'm going to use a food producer here, food and beverage, has different methodologies, methods in how they operate. They may use permanent labor. They may use seasonal labor. They may use temporary. That just means there's different skill requirements to run that asset. Push the button or read an alarm or perform a function. And so it's understanding those variabilities. When I'm going to go back to that, because it's not, I've seen the most elegant processes in the world. I've come out of 2 organizations that, one specifically, that was the leader in the world relative to food and beverage and processes and people and talent. But what was missing that we all felt and seen was the understanding variability of people capabilities, the OEM's capabilities in the design, our product variability, like was it the right temperature, and the 8 p.m., 8 a.m. mix versus the 10 a.m. rerun of it in batch mode. And all these things play in.
That kind of stuff, yeah.
So that's the stuff that's missing. It's not the blocking and tackling of conducting the FAT. Are the right ingredients listed in the FAT to go after to validate, and what's the mitigation strategy? Exactly. And I think companies like yours and mine have been able to pull back and provide this input to companies to help them add that into their repertoire of toolboxes that they're great at, and to drive that through. Sorry about that. Sorry, our timer is up, 30 minutes. To help drive that through for excellence. So I agree, standardization, but I think what's missing is the ingredients inside those standards that need to be looked at.
Yeah, and this is really great information. Stay tuned with us, because we are going to have another podcast to talking about that specific topic related to implementation, SIT training, all those kind of stuff. So this part 1 of a factory acceptance test here in today's packaging podcast with Wilberto Torres and Robert Champion. Thank you, Robert.
I look forward to another one. This is great stuff. Hopefully we can help the industry out. That's what this is all about. So thanks for let's doing this. Let's do it again.
Yeah. Let's do it again. Thank you again. Thank you everybody for watching. Bye.
Bye-bye.